encryption? Well, the science of encrypting and decrypting is called cryptography, right? So that's really what cryptography is at its very basic, right? At the very fundamental. So let's talk about it a little bit. When we talk about cryptography, you know a secret message is there, only its contents is concealed, right? So in other words, something's happening and you can see the encrypted message, right? You can see the data flowing, but you don't understand it because you don't have the key. So it really, that's the goal. So nobody else except for the intended recipient can decrypt. That's the goal. Does that always happen? No. Why? Because it involves a lot of things, from encoding and hashing. These are the methodologies of actually encrypting, and then confirming the encryption is true. And then when we look at the signatures and the secure key exchange, these are all critical elements, right? Because if the signature isn't valid, you're trusting a bad source. If the key isn't secure, then you are actually susceptible to a whole bunch of new attacks. And the root of trust. Phil, would you explain that one a little bit for us? This is a good one.
Yeah, so root of trust, it's an essential concept and/or foundational entity that basically provides a set of trustworthy functions that the rest of the device or ecosystem or end user environment can establish strong levels of security. It's often deployed and utilized in a hardware form factor known as an HSM or hardware security module. There are also software versions or software roots of trust. But the whole point being that having a high level of anti-tamper, high integrity, verbose levels of entropy, high levels of entropy for that matter, because randomness creates strength in key generation, is essential in building that pillar of trust up and through applications, devices, and software that is consumed on a daily basis. And so the concept of the RLT or root of trust is essential. We use it on a regular basis. It's also transparent, but it is definitely a foundational component within the cryptographic ecosystem.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So what we're talking about is, how do we know we got it right? Well, that's the point, is looking at these methodologies in a transparent way so we know it's right, and incorporating things like digital certificates, et cetera, as part of that process. Not just assuming it's all good, but really looking at it in that transparency, right? So applying it so that we know it's good and really building into that trust, really absolutely core to this, right? Because as we move forward, we really have to understand the entire system and looking at it as a complex thing, right? That could be, portions could be wrong, right? We can make mistakes, or AI can guess things that we didn't anticipate before as we get into the more of the quantum world and talking about that. So when we talk about the system itself, it's a computer system that employs cryptography in modern days. And the goal here is to implement algorithms for key generation, right? Because if the keys aren't truly random, and if we've used computers to generate them, it's hard for them to be random, right? So therefore we start making them longer and doing our best to make sure that nobody knows the underlying methodology we're creating those keys from. Otherwise, they could guess the keys.
That's a good point. There's actually an entire branch of cryptography dedicated to this idea of randomness, because it, especially years past, it was very hard to do that. That's why we all throw around the phrase pseudo random, right? Because we're doing our best to make something truly random. These concepts, like, I'm trying to remember the core concepts. One of them is confusion, right? Making sure that it's sufficiently random uniformly across the whole key space.
Yeah. And the crux of the issue is really built into the computers themselves, right? We're talking about an adding machine. That's all it does. So at the very basic level, it's really good at adding ones and zeros. The problem is, how do you get it to create a random number, a truly random number? And the answer is, it can't. To Alex's point, that means we have to go with something as close as random as we can hope to generate using a computer. So what if we didn't use a computer? What if we use something else? We'll talk about that a little bit more getting into this further. And the point here is, it's used to send a message in a secure way. An example is your credit card information, right? Or an email, because we don't want people to have either one of those, right? using digital signatures and other things to help us really encrypt and really understand it in a way that's usable, right? The other side is making this a usable thing, not slowing down the system so much that it becomes unusable, right? Because of the math and the other aspects. So really understanding it and then building it into the real world.